2024 NBA draft was not one that was very highly regarded. However, we did just get to see Summer League about a month and a half ago, so there's always stuff to take away from it. And so today, I'm going to be covering stuff that I saw and just a brief recap and how everyone did during Summer League. So with the first pick in the 2024 NBA draft, the Atlanta Hawks took Zaccharie Risacher with the first pick, much to most people's surprise. Coming into the draft, he had a reputation as a lot more of a role player with not really much star upside, and the general consensus was that he was kind of just a really safe pick. But honestly, a lot of people, myself included, didn't even have him in the top 10 of our final big boards. There was a lot of concern about what he could be as like a creator, but a lot of those concerns were somewhat quieted. I wouldn't say completely, but in his Summer League debut, he showed out pretty well. He scored 18 points. He passed the ball really well. He made the right reads. He was hitting most of his shots. None of his shooting splits were very good. When you actually watch the games, the first game he looked pretty good. The second one, not as much. But honestly, it was more of just a matter of missing shots rather than he looked bad. Most of the shots that he missed were pretty straight on, nothing crazy. There's still questions about what his actual upside is, whether there's some star upside there or not. Overall, I think this was a pretty good showing for him. He looks like a safe pick, not what you would want from a normal number one pick, but paired with a guy like Trae Young, Kobe Buffkin, Jaylon Johnson, the other guys who are currently on this roster, I think he probably fits in pretty well. If I'm a Hawks fan, I'm feeling a lot less concerned than I would have previously.
Incredible skill set and potential. Risacher launching the three, hits bottom, it's wet.
With the second pick, the Washington Wizards took Alex Sarr from the NBL via France, and over the course of the Summer League, he had probably about as poor of an offensive showing as you could possibly get. He could not score from any level. He struggled from the free throw line. He struggled from the three-point line. He couldn't hit his mid-range shots, and he could not get anything around the rim. I have never seen a big man struggle this much to get anything going, not even lobs, not dunks, nothing open. He made about as hard as he could for himself. Defensively, he actually showed pretty well. He blocked some shots. He moved fairly well. It stayed in front of guys. He hasn't lost all hope for a future. But right now, Alex Sarr is immediately on heavy bust watch. It was pretty disheartening to watch if you're a Wizards fan. However, I wouldn't be too discouraged because there's a couple of guys later on in this video that we're going to talk about that are going to kind of make up for Alex's shortcomings. With the third pick, the Houston Rockets took Reed Sheppard out of the University of Kentucky. One thing that we kind of harped on going into this draft was that it was considered fairly weak across the board. What Reed Sheppard showed in Summer League somewhat made us question that notion. He scored 20 points a game, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals and a block as a point guard, as a 6'1", 6'2" point guard. There was so many questions about Reed coming into the draft that never really made any sense to me. People questioned his athleticism. They questioned if he was a point guard. That's so ridiculous to say. One thing that anyone who actually watched him play can see is he has great passing vision. He has great passing accuracy. He has some of the best hands I have ever seen from a basketball player. And that's one of those elite traits that carries over. He's high IQ, he's high skill, and he has some elite skills, being his shooting, his hands, and his knack for making good plays. And this is a very, very hot take, but I've said this many times, both jokingly and then as the season's progressed a lot more seriously. Honestly, I think Reed Sheppard is the second coming of Stephen Curry. The things that he is good at are the same things that Steph Curry was amazing at coming into the draft and that have translated in the NBA and made him one of the greatest basketball players we have ever seen. And while I don't know if Reed Sheppard is going to reach those peaks, I highly doubt it, but I wouldn't throw out the possibility of Reed Sheppard being an all-NBA level basketball player. Not only does he always make the right play because he's very intelligent, but he's also so skilled. His shooting in Summer League wasn't great. He shot about 28% from 3, but that first game, if you would watch, he was bombing logo 3s consistently. And the athleticism stuff is still a little bit in question in terms of how he stays in front of people, but offensively, playing with the Houston Rockets, you have Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün. You have guys around him that can kind of supplement that defense when he is on the ball. If he gets blown by, you have 4 giant people in the paint ready to help, or whatever the case may be. But Reed Sheppard, great summer league. He showed that he's a real point guard and that he can just make stuff happen on both ends, even if he's not scoring at his best. Number 4 pick, Stephon Castle out of UConn, came into the draft with a lot of questions about whether or not he was a point guard. That was one of the big points of contention for draft people and analysts, because in high school he was more of a scoring guard while he also did play point guard. When he got to UConn, he was playing more of an off-ball wing position. He would do a lot of cutting. He would play kind of in the dunker spot sometimes, because one of his big weaknesses is that he's not a great shooter, especially from 3. So all these questions coming into the draft, and when he got into summer league, he kind of not necessarily shut them all down, but he definitely showed that he's totally capable of being a lead ball handler. During summer league, he scored a lot, he rebounded really well, and he made a lot of really nice passes. The shooting percentages weren't that great. He shot under 40% from the field. Pretty rough all around, but honestly, I am a lot more encouraged by what I got to see. Seeing him at least have the confidence to be a high volume scorer in summer league, despite his inefficiencies, is very encouraging to see. And playing off of Victor Wembanyama, and for his first year or however long Chris Paul was there, playing off of Chris Paul and getting his mentorship is going to be really good for him. So Spurs fans, you should be excited, not to mention his incredible defensive prowess. Dude is one of the best perimeter defenders in this draft, if not the best. As a 6'7", 6'6" point guard, or just guard wing, whatever you want to call him, he has good positional size. He can play up and down the line because he's really strong, and he's also like 215 pounds. So that's going to be a great advantage for the Spurs to have him come off the bench, guard really well, possibly get some point guard reps, and be a long-term piece for the future. At pick 5, the Detroit Pistons took Ron Holland out of the G League Ignite. Now, Ron had a really up and down season, and for those who kept up with me on my Twitter or any of my By the Rim social media, I had Ron Holland as my number 1 prospect all throughout the season. It never really made sense to me why people kept him down in like the 10s and even saying that he might fall out of the lottery, because just what we watched from the G League Ignite season, it should have been a consensus top 5 pick for Ron Holland. He's kind of a super athlete, considering how quick he is, how fast he is, how well he moves in at least a straight line, and he's also a very vertically explosive athlete. One of the things that was a big criticism is that he was kind of just a pure athlete type of player, but I'll never forget watching the Perth versus Ignite games in November or October, whenever it was this last year, where he played against Alex Sarr and the Perth Wildcats, and he just looked like a completely different player than what I was expecting. Because coming out of high school, I wasn't that high on him. I was saying that he looked more like a Michael Kidd-Gilchrist rather than a star that he was projected as, or people thought he could be. But when I watched that game, I saw a lot of flashes as a shot creator and as a potential lead scorer. And so even after the Ignite season, where he had a lot of up and downs, he struggled to shoot both from the 3-point line and even a little bit in the half court, he looked like a legitimate scorer. And I think that he could get to 20 points a game just off of his energy, as he plays so hard in those passing lanes, getting offensive rebounds, anything like that. But in summer league, he kind of showed a lot of those things that made you a little bit nervous about taking him as high as top 5, because he ran a lot in a straight line. He struggled to finish in the half court. The 3-point shooting was still rough. The free throw shooting wasn't great. But overall, I still think that he left a pretty good impact on the game. As you see, about 19 points a game, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal and a half, and a block. Shooting splits, pretty much abysmal, but that's summer league. That's to be expected with these 18, 19-year-old rookies. But he still showed a lot of that motor that you really like to see. And going into the actual season, it's going to be really interesting to see him try to play off of Ausar Thompson and Cade Cunningham. There's not a whole lot to say about number 6 pick Tidjane Salaun to the Hornets. He played hard. He got a lot of rebounds. He didn't shoot very well. He didn't pick up any stocks. He's still about 3 years away from being 2 years away. A lot like Bruno Caboclo of the past, the Hornets were taking a swing on who they think could be a big upside pick. So not much to say. He looked raw and is going to take some time to develop. With the 7th pick, the Portland Trail Blazers took Donovan Clingan out of UConn, national champion 2-time, by the way. really good defender. He kind of weirdly is in a position of need because they have a lot of talent at just about every position besides maybe power forward, and they still took Donovan Clingan, who was probably the best player on the board at that point. So in Summer League, Donovan Clingan really struggled to score. He really wanted to prove that he could shoot while also having a hard time even finishing. One thing about him is he led the entire Summer League in rebounds, and I think he set a record for blocks a game with 4.3, where he absolutely showed his defensive prowess, which was never really the question with him. Nonetheless, he absolutely impressed. His positional awareness and his recovery ability, despite being a little bit slow-footed and just really heavy built in general, is very impressive. A big point of concern is his offensive game, where even as a big man, he struggled to not just finish, but make layups over smaller players. And at 7'2", 7'3", that is a major point of concern, especially playing with Scoot Henderson, who's a big-time rim threat, and he's gonna love those dump offs. And so if Donovan Clingan can't make those, make open layups and even contested ones over smaller guys, that's going to be a big struggle for him. And another thing that really concerns me, that I've talked about this during the UConn season, is that despite him being so big, he's not really that good of a lob threat. I've seen him a lot of times have to come down with the ball because he just doesn't get off the ground enough. He tested pretty poorly during the combine. He loves to shoot threes. He wants to prove that he's a shooter, and it never at any point of his life has been a consistent or even a competent three-point shooter, let alone mid-range, let alone free throw shooter. He's never shot over even 60% from the free throw line. But even with all that hating, there's still a lot to like. One thing I do like about Donovan Clingan is that his passing as a big is pretty good, on top of the defensive stuff that we already mentioned. With DeAndre Ayton kind of being up in the air about whether he's going to be a long-term piece of the future, it was a good get for them. I like Donovan Clingan there, so good pickup for them. Number 8 pick, Rob Dillingham, showed a lot of what you like to see, but also a lot of what made teams very nervous about drafting him. His first couple of games, he looked extremely sped up and played with a little to no patience. The jump shot looked rushed, and he had a really hard time finishing at the rim. Overall, struggled quite a bit through the first couple of games, but the second half of Summer League was almost a totally different story. While his percentages were still pretty poor, he looked infinitely more confident and aggressive. He was getting shots that he liked and had much better rhythm. The biggest surprise to me was his passing and playmaking. Game 1 he had 5 assists, but they were mostly just basic swing the rock passes. But every other game, he was creating advantages and being way more intentional with his passing. The one big concern that I have is that almost every time he passes, he puts the ball into his right hand. I'm sure that can be ironed out as he develops more point guard skills. Defensively, there isn't too much to say. He's still really small and gets obliterated by screens, but when he really locks in, he's very capable of being a pest on ball, kind of like a Jose Alvarado type. He's pretty solid as a pickpocket, and he was playing those passing lanes, and honestly, I wouldn't expect him to be a great off-ball player, like in help defense, but otherwise he should be just fine. Overall, very promising Summer League where he showed a lot of everything. Seems that the Wolves really want him to be an instant impact player this year, so he's going to have to lock in for training camp. Having Mike Conley as a tutor is going to be good for him. He's going to be the perfect vet for Rob Dillingham to learn how to be an NBA point guard from. Zach Edey was only able to play in 1.5 games before exiting early because of an ankle injury, but in his time on the floor, he showed everything that you would expect from him. His immediate impact was as a screener and as a paint presence. His first play of the game was a monster block on Kyshawn George. He played the drop well and absolutely eats up space defensively. He also has pretty quick hands and is a quick leaper. He doesn't lumber around like people would say he does. He moves his feet pretty quickly and pretty well for a guy who, generally speaking, isn't particularly quick. On the offensive end, it cannot be understated how big of a screener he is. Scottie Pippen Jr. would just run guys into him, and he had the entire side of the floor open because of Zach Edey. Imagine what him and John Moran are going to do in the regular season. He's also a pretty smart roller and doesn't just barrel to the rim every time. Sometimes he can short roll, and he's not right now a very good playmaker, but he's capable of making those passes, and that's something that he could totally work on going forward. He hardly had any possessions where he actually had the ball to make a play. He was almost exclusively playing cleanup. He rebounded pretty well. He also had 15 rebounds in the Utah game, which 4 of them were offensive. He dunked the ball like he was supposed to, and there was one possession where he got a poster off of his own blocked shot from Walker Kessler. And going along with that, he has some of that Memphis nastiness that they really like. I'm personally a big fan of Zach Edey, and there's a reason that he's the front runner for Rookie of the Year. Number 10 pick Cody Williams had a pretty poor showing in the Utah Summer League. The cardio allegations were starting to make their runs because he had little to no impact in about 25 minutes of the game. He averaged about 5 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist while having horrific shooting splits of 26% from the field and 9% from 3. When watching the games, I totally forgot he was on the floor for long stretches, and it had me really worried. However, when it came to Las Vegas, he looked like a totally different player and looked like the guy who was at one point in contention for the number 1 pick. In 4 games, he put up 15 points, 3 rebounds, and 2.3 assists and a block a game while shooting 55% from the field, 38% from 3, and 89% from the free throw line. He looked aggressive, confident, and was actively making plays. The shooting looked a lot smoother, and in general, his confidence made him look like a totally different player. Defensively, he guards well on the ball, he slides his feet, and has great length to make ball handlers uncomfortable. He doesn't really play passing lanes very well despite having great length, but his weak side shot blocking could be something that he develops in the future. I'm very intrigued by his passing. Even though his assist numbers weren't like anything particularly great, he makes the right pass more often than not. He's a guy with high potential, and honestly was definitely a good pick for the Utah Jazz at 10. He's a great utility guy with a lot of upside. I see him having a range of outcomes between his brother, Jaylon Williams, even though they're totally different players, being a guy who can get you about 17 to 20 points a game, about 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and good defense. That's on a high end though, and that's like a borderline all-star in contention. But Jaden McDaniels is probably what you're looking at as a guy who plays good on defense, can fit into a role and be a connective playmaker, and that's just a guy that every team will want, and he's going to have a career that lasts him about 8 to 10 years. Twelfth pick Matas Buzelis was a Summer League favorite this year. He had a high volume of highlights in his short stint. He put the scoring bag on display all Summer League. He was getting to his pull-ups, he had counters for a lot of what the defense was giving him, and while it was good to see him creating looks, he absolutely did not convert them at a very good clip. He shot 33% from the field and 21% from 3 on a high volume. One thing I can say is that I totally admire his confidence. Despite going through a pretty poor shooting stretch, he never wavered for even a second. He was determined to get a shot up by any means necessary. And it's not like he was taking a bunch of bad shots, they just weren't going in. Once he starts hitting, it's going to be a totally different story. Funnily enough, he averaged less than 1 assist a game. He was totally doing his best Michael Never Swing the Rock Porter Jr. impression. I don't know if I've ever seen a ball handling player with tunnel vision as bad as Matas. It's like he was ignoring everyone else on the floor most of the time. I think the defensive stuff is very real from him. He averaged 2 steals and 2 blocks as a wing. He's pretty aggressive, and as a weak side rim protector, he's good at blocking shots. He also didn't foul that much considering the stocks. I think it'll be tough for him to get minutes this year as a rookie, but early on, it should be kind of a battle for him between Zach LaVine still being there playing the wing and Patrick Williams kind of being his position as well. But I think once they move on for one of or both of those guys, it'll open up minutes for him to really try and be an impact guy, even in what should be a lost season for the Bulls. And going forward, he should totally be a guy who's very valuable and has some star upside, and being a massive piece for this Bulls team that is his hometown that he grew up in. Nikola Topic, the 12th pick out of Serbia, out with a torn ACL. Devin Carter, the 13th pick out of Providence, out with shoulder surgery. With the last pick in the lottery, the Wizards took the guy who I think is going to be the best player in the draft, being Bub Carrington out of Pitt. The first game was probably his most impressive. He finished with 19 points, 9 rebounds, and 8 assists while shooting 50-50-80. His biggest strength is his shot creation and shooting. He loves to play in the mid-range, and he's a good shooter from 3. He's a creative ball handler without doing too much with the ball. Specifically in the Hawks game, he did well spotting up, but also taking and making high-quality shots off the dribble. His passing game is also very impressive. My personal comparison for him coming out of college was Tyrese Halliburton because of how he operates in the pick and roll. He was very smart and makes very simple passes every time, while also being able to hit those high-level reads at a good clip, all while not turning the ball over very much. His bread and butter on offense is mid-range, where he didn't shoot that well, especially compared to what was expected. He gets to the shots so easily, and in the NBA where a lot of teams love to play drop coverage, it'll be a shot that he gets to quite often. By far the biggest weak point for him is his rim finishing. Being the youngest domestic player in the draft, he's going to have to add strength to his frame. This will help alleviate the majority of his weak points. He struggles with contact because he isn't an exceptional athlete, and he'll likely always kind of struggle as a finisher. One thing I really notice is that on defense, he's very active on the ball and has good spatial awareness and help. But for whatever reason, he doesn't really get steals or blocks. He doesn't really gamble for anything on the defensive end. He keeps his guy in front of him and isn't much of a defensive playmaker. It's also worth mentioning that he's a very good rebounder for a guard. In his last game, he had 15 rebounds against the Bucks. With what Washington seems to be going for with their roster construction, I think this will be great for pushing the pace and being a team that can play fast. While his overall efficiency wasn't great, he shot 33% from the field. He showed a lot of everything that you'd like to see, especially considering how poor Alex Sarr was in Summer League. There's a lot of reasons why I think Bub is going to be the best player in his class. He's got the smarts, he can create his own shot, and he can create for others, while also being able to play decently on defense, and he's a great rebounder. All these things are traits that lead to great players in the NBA, and I wouldn't be shocked if he made an all-star team and eventually maybe an all-NBA team. The last pick I'm going to do a real deep dive into is Kel'el Ware. Kind of a surprise pick considering the Heat culture and Ware's reputation as a guy with a bad motor. But in Summer League, he blew all of that out of the water. He was one of the most dominant players in Summer League, especially in Vegas. Overall, he averaged about 18 and 8 with 2 blocks while shooting 58% from the field. In California, he had some rough games where his shot selection was very questionable and his decision making wasn't great. But once he built chemistry with Isaiah Stevens, it was pretty much over for everybody else. He's so dangerous out of the pick and roll because he's so agile and quick that he can get to the rim faster than defending bigs can even react, and he's an elite vertical threat. Dude throws down hard and he gets up for lobs. On top of that, while he didn't shoot the greatest, he's very much a threat on the pop. This is one of the things that he's kind of been renowned for, and what made him such a highly ranked prospect is the fact that he can at least kind of shoot, more in theory than in practice. I believe in his final year at Indiana, he shot almost 40% from 3 on okay volume for a big man, which is something you really like to see. He's not really a playmaker by any means, so having him be a play finisher is a lot more ideal than giving him the ball. I know there's been some possessions where he wants to post up, which I guess in Summer League it kind of works, but going forward in the NBA when you're trying to win games, that's probably not a play that you're going to as a priority. Defensively, he was great, good as a rim protector and a shot blocker. He moves his feet fairly well so he won't get blown by if he ends up on a ball handler. The athleticism is one of the big things that's a selling point for Kel'el Ware, and especially in that Heat system playing with Bam Adebayo, they could be a dangerous defensive tandem. The motor concerns are still there, but he showed an immense talent level, and of all the teams he could have gone to, Miami could be the one that could really get him to lock in. Jared McCain really struggled to put the ball in the basket throughout Summer League. He was taking good shots, but they just weren't going in. However, he did show that he's more than just a shooter. He had a lot of the time with the ball in his hands, and he showed great poise and patience as a ball handler. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he managed to find time on the floor as a rookie, playing either with or behind Tyrese Maxey. Dalton Knecht was another guy who was a tale of two summer leagues. In the California Classic, he looked very passive and didn't look like the guy who almost won a National Player of the Year. But when he got to Vegas, he was much more aggressive as a scorer. His shots still weren't falling to his standard, but he was much more encouraging on the offensive end. And on top of that, there was also some solid passing potential. I still wouldn't expect him to be a very good defender, being that he still looks kind of slow, but I think he'll be able to shoot and score at the next level. Tristan Da Silva damn near had a perfect summer league. He showed exactly what he's good at and what he can provide to a team with his shooting and his decision making. He was great as a connective passer and made the right play almost every time. Looked good defensively, he moves his feet well and has good positional awareness. Not going to be a big stocks guy, but a pretty good team defender. Great pickup for the Magic, and I think he's going to be able to play right away. Jacoby Walter, the 19th pick out of Baylor. I'm not going to lie, bro, he didn't do jack shit the entire summer league. That boy was trash. Jaylon Tyson was a guy that somehow flew under the radar, but was sneakily one of the most impressive rookies all of summer league. Definition of a do-it-all wing. He's a great shooter, a great passer, and a great rebounder from the wing position. He was almost 60-40-90 in summer league. He can fit a role really well, but I also think he has some legit 3-level scoring ability. He plays really hard defensively, and it wouldn't shock me if by mid-season or by the end of the season he ended up as a starter for the Cavaliers. Yves Missi, the 21st pick out of Baylor and Cameroon. He didn't do jack shit all summer league. DaRon Holmes, the 22nd pick out of Dayton. He started off pretty well, and then he tore his Achilles, man, so get well soon. You will be missed. AJ Johnson was a guy I watched and was surprisingly encouraged by what I saw. He was a big WTF pick at the first round, but I think he's putting some merit behind that selection. His shots weren't going in at a great clip, but the processes were very encouraging. Nobody could stay in front of him, and he slithers around guys so well. He's crafty and creative as a finisher, paired with being a very good quick twitch athlete. There's some real playmaking stuff too. He passed well and was creating advantages. Adding strength will solve 90% of his issues, and he could be a real player for the Bucks. The Wizards had a pretty solid draft despite Alex Sarr. Kyshawn George looked pretty good to me. The shot making is legit, he has an easy form and was hitting at a great clip. I also liked his passing as a ball handler. He was really sloppy with his dribbles and he got picked way more than you'd like, but I'm honestly not that discouraged by it. I also like the defense a lot. Despite not being a great athlete, he did a good job guarding and recovering. A pretty solid pickup for the Wizards. He might even find minutes this year, but he's probably going to be a G League guy. Pacome Dadiet, the 25th pick for the Knicks out of France. He also didn't do jack shit. When I watched him play, he really didn't do anything. Dillon Jones was another surprise pickup from the draft. Looked to be essentially the Josh Giddey replacement for the Thunder. Another do-it-all wing, he acted as a point guard for the Thunder. He's a great passer and a good ball handler. He gets to the paint at will. He's a pretty good rebounder. Actually, I think that's underselling. He's a ridiculous rebounder. At 6'6" or 6'7", he could probably get minutes at the 2 through the 4. The scoring stuff was pretty rough, but considering the team he's on, he could play a role and he should fit in and excel, especially considering that this team really needs rebounders. Terrence Shannon Jr. was one of the most impressive rookies that I saw by a good margin. The stats are deflated because he only played like 3 minutes in the last game because he had a hand injury. Absolutely nobody was stopping him getting to the rim, where he finished at an insane clip. Finishing over and around everyone, he's a legit slasher. The shooting stuff, not the best, but honestly not really anything that I would worry about. The most impressive thing to me was his defense. He was locking up on the ball and off. He's a great weak side help protector, and there's a very good chance he ends up being the best rookie on the Wolves this year. It's worth it to briefly dive into Ryan Dunn. The offensive stuff was very rough as you would expect, but oh my god, the defense is so legit. He plays so well in passing lanes, and as a help defender, he could legitimately lead the league in stocks for a guy not named Victor Wembanyama. This is some Matisse Thybulle 2.0 stuff right here, and the Suns could see him getting on the floor as soon as this year because of how dominant he is defensively. Isaiah Collier graduated as the #1 player in his class and somehow fell to 29 despite a pretty good season at USC. He's very legit as a ball handler and a driver. He's creative with the ball and can blow by guys at will. He's also a pretty good finisher despite being below the rim. The playmaking stuff is still all over the place. His passing accuracy is great, but his decision making is very questionable. That's a big reason why he ended up falling. The shooting stuff is still very concerning, and I have actual worries about it. And defensively, I liked what I saw. He plays passing lanes well. He could be a good guy for the future. Last pick of the first round was Baylor Scheierman from Creighton. He's the most predictable Celtics player I could have possibly imagined from this draft. Very, very intelligent, paired with being very skilled offensively. He can legit play the point because of how good of a passer he is. He's a ridiculous rebounder for a guy who's a pretty poor athlete. The shooting stuff wasn't there for him in Summer League, but it's the easiest bet for him to be a good shooter. Could find minutes as soon as this year because of how good he really is and how smart he is for a dominant Celtics team that just won the championship. Some other second round picks that would also be worth mentioning would be guys like Tyler Kolek, Bobby Klintman, Johnny Furphy, and some undrafted guys like Trey Alexander and Keyshawn Johnson. But that is going to do it for the 2024 Summer League recap. I'm glad you guys stuck around to watch this. Thank you for taking the time and sticking around. It was a long video, but I'm definitely glad that I made it. This is what I love to do. I love basketball, and I hope you do too. And I hope to see you around next time.